I guess it changed gears a little bit. You mentioned acquisition playbook and the need to educate people on the buy side. What got you interested in the buy side like I guess starting acquisition playbook?
Yes. So when over my journey as kind of having my boutique advisory firm, I've been exposed to a lot of people on the buy and the sell side, like really amazing entrepreneurs that want to grow their business. And again, it was in kind of close to the same time that I started Divestopedia, where I was introduced to an entrepreneur that wanted to grow through acquisitions. So he and I actually partnered together. So rather than that client advisor relationship, I took some equity alongside him to acquire a business. It was a $5 million business. 6 months after that, he came to me with another $5 million business and said, "Hey, like, do you want to buy this business together?" And not like I didn't have enough on my plate, so I said, "Yeah, sure, let's do it." So we bought a second business, and before I knew it, we had purchased 17 businesses and took that initial $5 million acquisition to $240 million over a 7-year period. We did a reverse takeover in 2019 and took the business public. So through that experience, I just saw the opportunity to really exponentially grow a business that a lot of kind of middle market entrepreneurs weren't taking advantage of. That after we took the business public, that kind of removed myself from kind of the day-to-day of the business and really saw, why can't I take this experience that we had over the 7 years and help other entrepreneurs execute on this? I think there's two sides to a transaction. There's the buyer and the seller. And I think as much education is needed on the sell side, just as much education is needed on the buy side to help, people execute on this strategy of acquiring, and you don't have to grow as kind of exponential as we did from that 5 to 240 million. But if you went from 5 to 50 million, I mean, that's still 10 times top line growth that I think is manageable. And I think with the right process and the right, playbook, so to speak, a lot of entrepreneurs can take advantage of that.
For entrepreneurs who are thinking about acquiring businesses, what in your experience do you find that they're often missing about their acquisition strategy? Are there some assumptions that they have initially that are incorrect? Do they overestimate the ability, or I guess they overestimate the ability to get, I guess, increased value of their business through an acquisition strategy that they typically underestimate it? Are there any kind of common characteristics?
No common characteristics. I think it's just kind of the overall process where and some people struggle with different areas of it. So, I always talk about 4 kind of foundational acquisition pillars. First one being deal sourcing. So sometimes business owners have difficulty, like, where do I find deals? I think there's a misunderstanding around, how many deals you have to look at to kind of land on one. I've seen some recent private equity statistics where they'll look at 700 opportunities to land on 6 or 7 portfolio investments in a year, and so that's a pretty high failure rate, and business owners don't recognize that. They think that, okay, I'm looking at one deal, I'm going to close it, and then when it doesn't close, it seems like it's kind of a daunting process. It's taken a whole bunch of time and energy and effort away from kind of the operations for something that didn't kind of transact or kind of get seen to the finish line. So that it just like, okay, we'll move on to the next strategy and we'll forget about acquisition. So that's one. The next one is how do I put offers around businesses? How do I value them? How do I structure them? Business owners kind of have some challenges around that. And then even at that point, once you get in there, like, there's so many obstacles and so many things that look wrong when you're doing due diligence, as you guys know, right? It's scary, right? So how do I get over that hump of like all of these challenges, all these obstacles, all this hair that I'm seeing on a deal? So I think a lot of times, even after an LOI is in place and it's signed, business owners will probably abandon it because they don't know how to mitigate the risk, either operationally through due diligence or kind of within the terms and agreements that they're signing. So I think there's lots of challenges within those 4 stages. And then of course the last stage that I always kind of talk about is the integration or the post closing. How do you create value? How do you bring 2 businesses together? And what's the strategy around that? So long-winded answer to your question, but those are the challenges that I see within those 4 phases of doing acquisitions.
Yeah, it was a big question. So I appreciate you being able to break it out into the 4 pillars. In terms of I guess it's the 3rd pillar, you mentioned as they're going through an acquisition and seeing some, I guess, hair on the business, so to speak. How do you as an advisor, or how does the business owner, how do you know when to walk away or when to know when to mitigate risk?
Yeah, great question. I think, at the onset, in our strategy piece with my clients, we like to set up deal breakers, right? So what are the absolute, if you found these, doesn't matter if it's at the beginning of the transaction or at the 11th hour, that you would just walk away from. So things like, ethical considerations, maybe some big litigation or liability that you just can't overcome, right? So those would be, absolute deal breakers where you just pull the pin and walk away. But other times I really like to kind of create almost like a matrix to say, okay, what is the risk, right? Let's actually write down the risk. What's the probability of the worst case scenario in this risk happening? And then how can we mitigate it, right? Again, either operationally, either through the due diligence process, right, where or we go back and we renegotiate terms and we try to mitigate it through legal agreements, right? So I try to very methodically have my clients walk through those 3 things: identify the risk, what's the probability of it occurring, and then how do we mitigate it? And then if we kind of see that the probability of this happening is 90%, and we just can't mitigate it in an effective way through one of those 3 kind of methods, then it's time to pull the pin. But oftentimes I find that the biggest risks that people get worried about, you put a probability weighting to it and it's only 10%, right? They're oh my God, this one customer is 40% of the sales of this business. And then I go to them and I say, okay, well, what are the chances of that one customer walking away? Maybe let's say a client says it's 50%. Okay, 50%, that's a pretty big probability and pretty big risk. How can you mitigate this risk now? Well, we can go over and above in terms of our delivery, right? We can have some indemnifications in the purchase agreement around, that customer leaving. We can put some holdbacks into the purchase agreement. And then as they start to walk through, those very specifics on that, they start to say, okay, this risk is manageable, and we could kind of get over it and move on to kind of the next kind of very big hurdle that we have to deal with on getting this thing closed.
That's very good advice. I want to concentrate quickly on the 4th pillar, because I think it's one that is often overlooked, and that's post-merger integration. What advice do you have for people who are doing this for the first time, or maybe even more generally?
Yeah, I think post-merger integration, and this is going to be a depends again answer for you, Ted. So I'm just getting you the early qualifier here, but it really does depend. So at the onset, establishing that strategy of the type of acquirer you're going to be, almost gives you a roadmap for how integration will follow through, right? So a lot of times, an acquirer might say that they want to move into a different geography, right? So when they're going to do that acquisition, they're going to bring on the existing management team in that new geography because they just don't have a management team in place there. So, that's going to impact your due diligence. You're not going to worry as much about kind of continuity of customers because that existing management team is still there. They're vested in the deal. And then on the integration side, it's a little bit easier, right? Because now, maybe you're not going to rebrand that business. You're going to have the exact same management team. So there isn't going to be, a lot of challenges around, employee issues because they're going to be reporting to the exact same people that were there before. So the integration, kind of roadmap that you're using in those scenarios different than if you were to acquire a business outright. You're going to replace management, you're going to change your brand, you're going to implement a new computer system. So you're really going to bring these two businesses together. So establishing the strategy up front on how you're going to acquire a business is going to dictate all of the integration that you're going to do on the back end, and also going to dictate the level of diligence and the areas that you're going to focus on in diligence on bringing these businesses together. Obviously the recommendation would be to bring outside help. I recently did a webinar that had integration experts on the HR side and on the operational side. So bring in the expertise that you need to bring these businesses together. But the it depends answer is, how are you going to acquire these businesses at the onset, and thinking through that all the way through to now I've bought this business. What are the important areas that I need to focus on now bringing these businesses together?
To continue on the buy side, 2021 has seen record valuations and record M&A transactions. If you're a buyer, how do you go about finding value in this kind of market?
Yeah, it definitely is, a very heated market. There's lots of, acquisitions and lots of access to capital too, right? I find that those two things are kind of fuel to the valuation fire, so to speak, in terms of increasing multiple, increasing competition. I think people have to be leery of the valuation that they pay, right? They have to be leery of the ability to service any debt that you're taking on in kind of completing these transactions. I still think there's value in that lower middle market space, so kind of that sub $10 million. There aren't as many, the buyer landscape is a little less crowded in that. So you're typically dealing with high net worth individuals that maybe want to buy a business. You're dealing with other strategics, but again, the strategics aren't as kind of coordinated or as sophisticated on doing acquisitions. So I think there's value in that lower middle market space. But I do think that people have to be leery on the valuation that they're paying, and kind of bringing it back to not only the multiple, but also what their return on equity is going to be, and their return on equity is dictated by the cash flow that they can generate into the future. So diligence, conservatism, really scrubbing your future forecast is important, and if you get that wrong, you can be kind of in front of what's called the winner's curse, right? So you win the acquisition, but in some cases you might have paid too high of a multiple, and that could be disastrous for acquirers.
Where do you see valuations going in 2022? We have lots of different things happening, as we're all aware: inflation, labor shortages. We have record access to capital. Questions about what interest rates will be doing going forward. How do you see the market playing out? I guess the lower mid market, where you specialize, playing out in 2022, and what factors are influencing it?
Yeah, I think the low end of the lower middle market. So again, that kind of sub $10 million deal. I think the valuations have been relatively consistent. In Canada, it would be kind of 3 to 5. In the US, kind of 4 to 6. Valuation multiples a little bit higher in the US. So I don't think that that hasn't deviated all that much. And kind of, again, that, call it $10 million and up. So that middle market space, let's say, into the hundreds of millions of dollars. I think valuation multiples are definitely dependent on, industry. Some industries are super hot. Healthcare, home services spaces are definitely hot. Food spaces are hot. So, there's a lot of competitive tension in those spaces. I think, the as long as the access to capital doesn't shut off, I think the valuation multiples are still going to be heated. I don't think they could get any higher. I could be wrong, but I think there's still going to be a lot of appetite for, and valuation multiples will follow in terms of being high. For other industries, I can't. I'm going to go back to it depends, right? It just depends on, on what people are seeing hot and the trends where we're going. Obviously the technology trend is important. So people are going to be looking for acquiring things that can, improve the efficiency through technology. So, and then I also think there's the trend of finding labor. A lot of acquisitions now are because there's a labor shortage. So people are looking to acquire businesses to be able to get access to talent, access to that labor pool of labor resources.
Do you have anything you'd like to add? Anything else you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, sure. If you're giving me an opportunity to do a little bit of marketing on the Acquisition Playbook, I'd love to. So, Acquisition Playbook is, a program that I use with entrepreneurs. Again, it's really kind of that holistic process, teaching from everything from deal sourcing to things you need to think about on the integration side. I found that people want to dip their toe into this, area, and my philosophy is if you're going to do it, you got to do it right. So it's a 3-month program for entrepreneurs that want to get kind of expert coaching on the process from start to finish. I'm seeing a lot of great results from my clients, not only in kind of their ability to source deals, but also their understanding of how to put offers out on actual targets. So a lot of my clients come to me with actual targets in mind, and we help them kind of navigate through that. So it's kind of a little bit more of an easier way to engage kind of high-end consulting to help through this start to finish process of implementing an acquisition strategy.
I encourage everyone to definitely check out Acquisition Playbook. It'll be linked in the article that I think most people will be viewing this video on, so you'll be able to check it all out there. John, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. It's been a really great conversation. I could keep this going for another hour or two, but I know you have to stop. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. It's always fun to catch up with you, and thanks for the opportunity.